The aliens' bold decision. The Xalor were a proud and powerful species. They had conquered countless worlds and built an empire that stretched across the stars. Their technology was advanced, and their military was nearly unstoppable. But now, after centuries of prosperity, the Xalor Empire was in trouble. The once glorious empire was crumbling. Civil wars had torn through their ranks, and their economy was on the brink of collapse. The Xalor had long relied on their superior technology and strategic planning, but even that was no longer enough. There was one enemy they couldn't defeat: themselves. In desperation, the Xalor Council gathered in the Grand Hall, a massive room with shining walls of metal and glass. The council was made up of the most powerful leaders of the Xalor Empire, and they had to decide how to save their world from destruction. The room was quiet as the ambassadors, generals, and politicians waited for the council's decision. Ambassador Krill, a tall and imposing figure, stood before the council. His silver eyes gleamed with a mix of excitement and fear. He knew that if they didn't act quickly, the empire would fall, and with it, all of their history and power. "We have tried everything," Krill said, his voice echoing in the hall. "We have used our technology, our weapons, and our strategies, but nothing has worked. Our own people are turning against each other, and the economy is in ruins. We are running out of time. But there is one option we have not explored." The other members of the council looked at him curiously. Krill paused for a moment, his eyes scanning the room. He had an idea, a bold and dangerous one. He knew that it might be the only hope they had left. "Humans," he said, his voice low but filled with conviction. "We should hire humans." The room fell silent. The idea was shocking. The Xalor had never worked with humans before, and the thought of bringing such a chaotic and unpredictable species into their empire was unthinkable. Humans were known for their warlike nature and their impulsive behavior. They were, in many ways, the complete opposite of the disciplined and orderly Xalor. "How can you suggest such a thing?" One of the council members, General Vec, growled. He was a veteran of countless battles and had seen firsthand the unpredictability of human soldiers. Humans are undisciplined. They are a threat, not an asset. Krill remained calm, his silver eyes never leaving General Vec's face. "That is exactly why they could be the key to our survival. Humans fight with a desperation that no other species possesses. They will do anything to survive. And right now, that is exactly what we need." There was another long silence in the room as the council members exchanged uncertain glances. General Vec wasn't the only one who doubted the idea. The Xalor had always been a species of reason and control, and the thought of hiring a species that thrived on emotion and chaos seemed like madness. But Krill continued, his voice steady. "We have no choice. Our people are torn apart by civil war. Our soldiers lack the will to fight. But humans fight with a passion, a fire we cannot comprehend. We can use that. We can use them to turn the tide in our favor." Another council member, Ambassador Thar, spoke up. "But how do we even contact them? We have no communication with their world. They are isolated, primitive." Krill smiled, a cold, confident smile. "I've already made contact. I've been speaking with the humans for weeks. They are aware of our situation and are intrigued by our offer. They are not as primitive as we think. They have their own advanced technologies. They have the strength, the determination, and the will to fight." The council members looked at each other, their faces filled with doubt and fear. But Krill's words rang true. The Xalor were running out of time, and they had no other options. They needed help, and they needed it quickly. Krill raised his hand, signaling for silence. "I understand your fears, but this is the only option left. We must hire humans. If we want to survive, we must take this risk." For a moment, there was a tense silence in the room. Then, General Vec spoke again, his voice softer this time. "I still don't trust them. But if what you say is true, then we have no other choice." Ambassador Thar nodded. I agree. We will send a message. If the humans agree to join us, we will prepare them for battle. Krill's smile widened. Thank you. This is the beginning of a new alliance. Together, we will restore the Xalar Empire. Together, we will crush our enemies. As the council members nodded in agreement, Krill felt a sense of relief wash over him. He had taken the boldest step of his life, and now there was no turning back. The fate of the Xalar Empire rested in the hands of the humans. The arrival of the humans. The Xalar waited in anticipation. They had made the decision. Now they were about to meet the humans who might save their empire or bring about its final destruction. The message had been sent, and now they stood on the edge of a new chapter in their history. The Xalar Empire's largest city was the place chosen for the meeting. Towering spires of metal and glass reached toward the sky, and the air hummed with the energy of their advanced technology. It was a place of power and pride, but today it felt different. Today, it felt like the fate of the entire galaxy rested on what happened next. Ambassador Krill stood at the front of the meeting hall, his eyes focused on the massive communication screen. It buzzed to life, and on the screen, a human figure appeared. It was a man, dressed in a simple uniform, but his eyes were fierce and full of determination. The Xalar had been expecting a group, but it was just this one human, Captain Max Walker, standing alone. So these are the humans, Krill thought to himself. The human seemed calm, but Krill couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this human than met the eye. Max Walker's voice came through the speakers, clear and steady. I'm Captain Max Walker. I've been sent to represent humanity's interest in this agreement. Krill nodded, his silver eyes studying the human. Welcome, Captain. We appreciate your willingness to come. You have heard our offer. We need you, your people, to fight for us. Together, we can defeat the enemies that threaten our empire. Max's expression didn't change. His eyes remained locked on Krill. I've heard your offer, Ambassador. But let me be clear. We're not here to fight for anyone but ourselves. We have our own reasons for being here. Krill felt a twinge of doubt. He had expected the humans to be eager, to be excited by the opportunity to work with such an advanced species. But Max's tone was firm. The Xalar had underestimated the humans' independent spirit. Still, Krill pressed on. We are willing to provide you with resources, technology, and military support, Krill said, trying to reassure Max. We can make you and your people stronger than ever before. Together, we can defeat your enemies and rebuild your world. You have nothing to lose. Max didn't respond right away. His gaze shifted briefly, as if considering the offer, but then he looked back at Krill. We don't need your help. We can handle our own problems. But if you're willing to share your technology, we might be able to work something out. But don't expect us to blindly follow orders. Krill was taken aback. He had expected the humans to be grateful, to see the Xalar as their saviors. Instead, they were met with resistance and suspicion. It was clear that the humans didn't trust them, and Krill realized this would be more complicated than he had anticipated. The meeting continued, with the two sides negotiating terms. Max insisted on strict conditions before agreeing to help the Xalar. He demanded that the humans be treated as equals, not as soldiers for hire. He also insisted that the Xalar share all their technology, not just what they thought the humans needed. It was a bold move, but Max wasn't backing down. Krill and the council were stunned. The humans were not what they had expected. They were strong-willed, independent, and unwilling to be controlled. This was not a species that could be easily manipulated. But Krill also saw something else in Max's eyes, something that made him pause. There was a fire there, a spark of determination, the kind of fire that the Xalar had lost long ago. Maybe this was what they needed. Maybe this was the strength the Empire had been missing. Finally, after hours of discussion, Max stood up and gave a single nod. We'll work with you, he said, but remember, we're not your pawns. We'll fight for our own survival, And if that happens to align with your goals, then so be it. Ambassador Krill's heart raced. The humans had agreed, but it was clear that they had their own agenda. The Xalor had to tread carefully. They had made an alliance, but it was an alliance of convenience. How long would it last? As Max turned to leave, he looked back at Krill one last time. "We'll be watching you. If you break our trust, this deal is off. Don't forget that." Krill's silver eyes narrowed. The humans were unpredictable, and this would be a dangerous partnership, but he had no choice. The fate of the Xalor Empire now rested in the hands of these strange, fiery humans. The first test. The Xalor Empire was about to face a trial unlike any they had known. The humans, under Captain Max Walker, had agreed to fight alongside them. But the trust between the two species was thin, and the road ahead was filled with uncertainty. Max and his team had left the meeting, but Krill couldn't shake the feeling that things were far from settled. Days passed, and the Xalor prepared for the first mission with their new human allies. The situation was critical. One of the Xalor's most important planets, Verax, was under threat. A brutal warlord, Gorath, had rallied an army of mercenaries and was threatening to destroy the planet. The Xalor had no choice but to act quickly. Krill called for a meeting with Max and his team to discuss the plan. The tension in the room was thick. Krill had hoped for more cooperation, but Max had been distant, focused only on the strategy. It was clear the humans didn't trust the Xalor fully, and that made Krill nervous. "We have a chance to end this warlord's threat," Krill said, trying to sound confident. "But we need to work together. We can't afford any mistakes." Max didn't answer immediately. He glanced at his team, then back at Krill. "I've seen your technology. It's impressive, but we need something more. We need a clear plan, no surprises. We don't trust you enough for surprises." Krill nodded slowly, realizing that the humans were not just concerned with the mission. They were concerned about the Xalor's true intentions. They feared being used, betrayed. But Krill couldn't afford to waste time. The threat to Verax was too great. "The plan is simple," Krill said. "We will send a joint strike force to Gorath's position. We will neutralize his army and capture him alive. The Xalor will provide air support, and the humans will lead the ground assault." Max's face remained serious. "Fine, but we lead the ground assault. The Xalor will stay in the sky, keeping their distance. No interference." Krill's instincts told him to argue. The Xalor were the superior fighters in space, but on the ground, the humans were fierce. Reluctantly, he agreed. The mission was more important than their pride. The day of the mission arrived quickly. The Xalor's warships hovered above the battlefield, their advanced weapons ready to strike from the sky. On the ground, Max and his team of human soldiers prepared for the assault. They were heavily armed, their weapons much more primitive than the Xalor's, but they were skilled and ready for anything. Max stood at the front of his team, his eyes scanning the horizon. He was a man of few words, but his presence was enough to command respect. His team followed him without question, and their faces were determined. Krill stood on the command ship, watching the humans prepare. He couldn't help but feel a mix of doubt and hope. The humans had shown no fear, no hesitation. They were ready. But would they be enough? This was their first real test together. As the ground team moved out, Krill gave the order for the Xalor ships to move into position. The sky above Verax darkened as the massive warships hovered, their engines humming with power. The battle was about to begin. The first wave of human soldiers hit the ground running. They moved quickly, covering the terrain with skill and precision. Their guns fired, and the mercenaries that served under Gorath began to fall. The humans fought like they were born for this, their movements fast and deadly. But they faced a fierce enemy. Gorath's mercenaries were well-trained and well-equipped, and they weren't going down without a fight. Max led the charge, his eyes focused and his mind clear. He moved with purpose, his team following his every command. They pushed forward, clearing the enemy lines, and forcing their way toward Gorath's stronghold. Meanwhile, in the sky, the sailor ships launched their attacks. Powerful beams of energy lit up the sky, tearing through Gorath's defenses. The warlord's forces were now caught between two fronts, the humans closing in from the ground, and the sailor attacking from above. But as the battle raged on, something unexpected happened. A massive explosion rocked the battlefield, and the ground shook violently. Max's team was thrown off balance. Krill's heart skipped a beat as he watched the footage from the command ship. The humans were in trouble. Max's voice crackled through the comms, calm but urgent. "We need backup, now." Krill hesitated for a moment, torn between his duty to the sailor and his desire to keep the humans safe. But he knew the choice was clear. The sailor couldn't afford to lose this battle. With a sharp command, Krill ordered the sailor ships to drop down lower, unleashing a barrage of firepower on the enemy's stronghold. The ground shook again, but this time it was the enemy's forces that were being torn apart. The humans pushed forward, their determination driving them through the chaos. After what felt like hours, the battle began to turn in their favor. Gorath's mercenaries were scattered, and the warlord himself was cornered. Max and his team stormed the stronghold, and soon they had captured Gorath alive. As Max stood over the defeated warlord, he glanced up at the sailor ships hovering above. There was a silent moment of understanding between him and Krill. They had done it together. The humans had proven their worth, and the sailor had held up their end of the bargain. Krill felt a strange sense of relief. The humans had earned his respect, and for the first time, he wondered if this alliance could truly work. The unseen threat. The victory over Gorath's forces was a turning point for both the sailor and humans. The alliance, though fragile, had proven its strength. For the sailor, it was the first sign of hope in a long time. For the humans, it was a powerful statement. They could hold their own, no matter the odds. Yet, as the days passed, a dark cloud began to hang over the alliance. There were whispers among the sailor that the victory had come too easily. Something didn't feel right. The humans, on the other hand, kept to themselves, focused only on their mission. But Max Walker, the leader of the human soldiers, had his own doubts. He knew that their success on Verax had been only the beginning. The real challenge was still ahead. Krill watched as the humans began to gather their forces, preparing for the next battle. He could sense the unease in the air. The Sailor Empire had been saved, for now, but the war was far from over. The mercenaries they had defeated were only a small part of a much larger web of enemies, and Krill feared what might come next. It was then that a disturbing message arrived. It was from one of the Sailor's outposts on the distant planet, Arath. The message was brief and filled with confusion, but the message was clear. Something had attacked. The outpost had gone silent, and the last transmission was a series of strange, distorted signals. Krill's heart raced as he read the message. The Sailor had no idea what had attacked, but the situation was urgent. He knew that if the outpost fell, it could spell disaster for the entire empire. "We must act quickly," Krill said, turning to his advisors. "Prepare the fleet. We're going to Arath." Max Walker and his team were already on standby, ready to go. But this wasn't like the last mission. There was no enemy to fight yet, no clear target to strike. This was a mystery, and Max knew that mysteries were often far more dangerous than they seemed. "I'll go with you," Max said, his voice steady. "If something's out there, we'll find it." Krill hesitated for a moment. The humans had already proven their worth in battle. But this was different. This wasn't a fight, it was a search. And Max's team was not equipped for something like this. But Krill knew that the humans would not sit back and wait. They had already made it clear that they would not be left out. "Fine," Krill said, his voice firm. "But we move quickly. We don't know what we're dealing with." The journey to Arath was tense. The fleet of Sailor warships moved in tight formation, their sleek forms cutting through the blackness of space. The humans were on board the command ship, watching the stars as they passed by. There was an eerie stillness in the air, as if something unseen was lurking just out of reach. Max stood by the window, looking out at the endless expanse. His mind was sharp, his senses alert. He had led his team through many dangerous situations, but this felt different. There was an unsettling feeling in his gut that he couldn't shake. It was as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. The Salar warships dropped out of hyperspace and approached Arath. The planet was small and desolate, with a red-brown surface covered in craters. The Salar had established their outpost here years ago, but now there was nothing. No communication, no sign of life. Just silence. Something's not right, Max muttered as he stood beside Krill on the bridge of the command ship. Krill nodded. The signal we received from the outpost was strange. Distorted, like it was being intentionally jammed. The fleet descended toward the surface, and the feeling of unease grew stronger. The air was thick with tension, and every member of the crew felt it. As they landed near the remains of the outpost, Max's team prepared to disembark. They were armed, ready for anything, but the unknowns of this mission weighed heavily on them. Max's eyes narrowed as he stepped off the ship, scanning the horizon. The base was eerily quiet. No signs of life. No signs of struggle. It was as if everyone had simply vanished. "We need to find out what happened here," Max said, his voice low. "Stay sharp." The team moved cautiously through the ruins, checking each building, each structure. Everything was abandoned. The outpost had been left in perfect condition. Too perfect. It was as if it had been wiped clean. Then, as they reached the center of the base, they found it. A strange, glowing device, embedded in the ground, pulsing with a soft blue light. It was nothing like anything the Salar had ever seen. "What is this?" Krill whispered, his eyes wide. Max knelt beside it, carefully examining the device. It looked like a piece of advanced technology, but it was unlike anything the humans or Salar had ever encountered. The energy it radiated felt wrong, unnatural. Max's hand hovered over it. "Whatever this is, it's not just an attack. It's something much worse." The ground beneath their feet suddenly shook, sending the team stumbling. The glowing device flared brighter, and in that instant, a chilling voice echoed through the air. "You should have stayed away." The revelation. The voice faded, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Max and his team stood frozen, their eyes locked on the strange, glowing device. It pulsed rhythmically, almost as if it had a heartbeat of its own. The air was thick with tension, and every sense felt heightened, as if something was about to explode at any moment. Max was the first to move. His instincts kicked in, his military training pushing him to stay calm. "Stay focused," he ordered his team. "We don't know what we're dealing with yet." Krill stood beside him, his usual calm demeanor shaken. His eyes never left the device, the strange blue glow reflecting in his dark eyes. This technology is not Salar," Krill muttered. "Nor is it human." Max crouched down, examining the device more closely. The structure was metallic, but the energy it radiated was unlike anything either the humans or the Salar had ever encountered. It was as if it didn't belong to this galaxy. The voice that spoke to them. The words had been cold, full of warning and malice. "What was that voice?" Max asked, standing back up and scanning the area, half expecting another attack. "And why is this device here?" Krill shook his head. "I've never heard anything like it. The Salar have enemies, but this feels different." Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the air. The ground trembled again, this time more violently. The team staggered, trying to keep their balance. Max quickly motioned for everyone to fall back. "Get to the ship now." But it was too late. A massive shadow loomed overhead, blocking out the sun. The team looked up, their hearts sinking. A fleet of sleek, dark ships appeared from the atmosphere, their advanced technology gleaming in the sunlight. There were dozens of them, each one larger and more intimidating than anything the humans or Xalar had ever seen. Krill's voice was low, almost a whisper. "They're here." The ships descended toward the base, their engines roaring. The air became thick with the sound of their arrival, and the Xalar warships in orbit responded, but the enemy fleet was fast. Within seconds, they were already on the ground. Max didn't hesitate. He raised his weapon and signaled his team. "We're not backing down. We fight. Protect that Xalar and get back to the ship." The human soldiers moved with practiced precision, taking cover behind the damaged structures. The alien ships landed with terrifying force, their guns aimed and ready to fire. The team opened fire, but their weapons barely scratched the surface of the enemy ships. Max's heart raced as he realized they were facing something far beyond their capabilities. Krill stepped forward, his hand raised to stop the fire. "Hold your fire," he shouted. "Let them land. We need answers." The human soldiers reluctantly lowered their weapons, but they were still tense, ready for anything. The alien ships landed softly, and a hatch on one of them slowly opened. The tension in the air was suffocating. The first figure to step out was tall, thin, and shrouded in dark armor. The being's face was hidden behind a mask, but there was no mistaking the power it radiated. It spoke in a language that neither the humans nor the Xalar could understand. But Krill's eyes narrowed. He recognized the tone. It was commanding, as if the speaker expected obedience. Max stepped forward, his voice steady despite the uncertainty. "Who are you?" The figure paused before replying in a voice that seemed to cut through the air like ice. "We are the Verax. You have trespassed in our territory. You were warned." The word struck Max like a blow. Verax. He had never heard of them before, but the authority in their voice made it clear that they were no strangers to conflict. Krill's expression darkened as he processed the name. The Verax were a species feared by the Xalar, but no one had seen them in centuries. "We didn't come here to start a war," Krill said, his voice calm but firm. "We were investigating an attack on our outpost. We didn't know this was your territory." The Verax leader stepped closer, his voice colder than before. "You didn't know, but you are here now, and you will pay the price for your mistake." Max's eyes locked onto the Verax leader. He didn't like the way things were going. "We're not going to let you threaten us," he said, his voice filled with quiet defiance. The Verax leader tilted his head, as if considering Max's words. Then he turned to his soldiers and gave a silent command. Instantly, the Verax soldiers raised their weapons. Max's team braced for impact, but Krill stepped in front of them, his hand raised. "We don't want this to escalate," he said urgently. "We will leave your territory peacefully. Just let us go." The Verax leader chuckled, but it wasn't a laugh. It was a cold, empty sound that sent a chill through everyone present. "You think you can leave? No, you will stay, and you will witness what happens when you defy the Verax." Max clenched his fists, but he knew there was no choice now. He glanced at Krill, who nodded. This was a battle they weren't prepared for. The Verax were not to be underestimated. The enemy soldiers advanced, their weapons trained on the human and Xalar teams. Max felt the weight of the situation press down on him. They had come to Aroth looking for answers, but now they were trapped in a deadly game with an unknown enemy. The war unfolds. The air crackled with tension as the Verax soldiers closed in, their weapons raised, their eyes cold and unyielding. Max and Krill stood together, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. The Xalar forces had already begun to form ranks behind them, ready to fight, but even they knew that they were up against something far beyond their usual enemies. Max's grip tightened around his weapon, but he knew the odds were not in their favor. The Verax weren't like the mercenaries or alien invaders they had fought before. They were organized, ruthless, and seemingly unstoppable. The Verax leader's voice broke the silence. "You think you can just walk into our territory and leave unscathed? You are nothing but pests, and pests must be eradicated." Krill stepped forward, his hand raised to signal his forces to hold their fire. "We don't want a war with you. We only came to investigate. We can leave your territory and never return." The Verax leader tilted his head, his expression unreadable beneath the mask. "You may leave, but not before you witness the true power of the Verax." Before Max or Krill could react, the Verax soldiers opened fire. The sharp sound of blaster fire rang through the air, and the ground around them erupted with explosions. Max's heart raced as he dove behind a nearby structure, narrowly avoiding a blast that would have taken him out in an instant. "We need to fight back," Max shouted to Krill, his eyes scanning the battlefield. Krill nodded, his face grim. "Prepare your forces. If we don't fight, we'll be wiped out." Max motioned for his team to move, and they quickly returned fire. The sailor and human forces worked together, covering each other as they pushed back the advancing Verax soldiers. But every move they made was countered by the superior firepower and advanced tactics of the Verax. The Verax were organized, their soldiers moving with military precision. Every step they took seemed calculated, every shot fired with deadly accuracy. Max's team fought with everything they had, but the Verax didn't seem to be slowing down. "Fall back," Krill ordered, seeing that their position was becoming increasingly untenable. "We need to regroup." Max hesitated, looking at the battlefield. The Verax were closing in, and it seemed like they had no choice but to retreat. "Regroup at the ship," Max yelled. "We'll hold them off as long as we can." The team sprinted toward the ship, firing at anything that moved. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they didn't give up. Every human soldier fought like their lives depended on it, and for many they did. As they reached the ship, Max saw the sailor forces struggling to keep up. The Verax were relentless. The last few human soldiers made it to the ship, and Max quickly slammed the hatch shut, signaling for the others to power up the engines. "We can't win this fight on the ground," Krill said, his voice low and filled with concern. "We have to leave." Max glanced at the window, watching the Verax soldiers continue to advance. He knew Krill was right. They couldn't stay here, but leaving felt like a surrender. They had come here to find answers, and now they were forced to flee. As the engines roared to life, the ship ascended, breaking free from the planet's atmosphere. Max looked back at the battlefield below, his mind racing. The Verax had proven their strength, but Max wasn't ready to give up yet. They had only just begun to understand the power of their new enemy. "We'll come back," Max muttered to himself, his voice filled with determination. "We'll find a way to stop them." The final stand. The journey back to the sailor capital was silent. Max stood at the window of the ship, staring out into the void of space. His mind raced as he thought about everything they had faced on Earth. The Verax were unlike any enemy he had ever encountered. They were ruthless, organized, and had the technology to back up their threats. Even though they had escaped, Max knew that they couldn't run forever. Sooner or later, the Verax would come for them again. Krill walked up beside Max, his face unreadable. The sailor leader had been quiet ever since the battle. The loss had hit hard, not just because of the defeat, but because it was clear that the sailor were no match for the Verax on their own. They needed the humans. They needed Max. "We're not going to win this war unless we work together," Krill said, his voice low but firm. "The Verax have more power than we could ever have imagined. But we can still fight. We still have a chance." Max turned to look at Krill. The sailor had always been confident, but now there was something different in his eyes. The same desperation that Max had felt on the battlefield was there. "We don't have a choice," Max replied. "We need to build a real army, and we need more than just weapons. We need strategy. We need intel. We need allies." Krill nodded. "I will contact the other factions. Maybe they will see reason." Max's thoughts turned to the strange device they had found on Earth. The Verax had made it clear that they were behind the attack, but what did the device mean? And why had it been left behind? Do you think the device has something to do with this? Max asked, glancing over at the console where the device was stored. It felt important. Krill's eyes narrowed. It's possible. But we need to understand it fully before we can use it against the Verax. The technology is far beyond anything we've seen before. I'll need the best engineers to study it. Max agreed. If they could figure out how the device worked, it might be their only chance of leveling the playing field against the Verax. But it was a big if. A few days later, the Salar Command Center was buzzing with activity. Engineers from both the Salar and humans were working together, studying the strange device. The room was filled with data screens and holoprojectors, all focused on understanding the device's power. Max paced in front of the engineers, unable to sit still. He had seen the desperation in Krill's eyes. The Verax had made it clear they were coming for them, and he knew that they couldn't afford to wait much longer. Suddenly, one of the engineers raised his hand. "We've found something," he said, his voice filled with excitement. Max and Krill rushed over, looking at the screen. The engineer pointed to a series of glowing symbols that were appearing on the device's surface. "This isn't just technology," the engineer explained. "It's a weapon, a powerful one. But it needs a power source, a very specific one." "What kind of power source?" Max asked, his eyes narrowing. The engineer hesitated. It's a living energy, something like a neural network. The device requires a connection to a mind, a brain. And not just any brain. It needs the mind of a species with highly advanced cognitive abilities. Max's stomach dropped. "Are you saying it needs a human brain?" The engineer nodded slowly. "Yes, it needs a neural connection, one that only a human could provide." Krill clenched his fists. "This is madness. We can't sacrifice a human to power this device." Max's mind raced. There had to be another way. The idea of using a human as a power source felt wrong. But if it was the only way to stop the Verax, what choice did they have? As the days passed, Max and Krill worked tirelessly to find another solution. But the Verax were growing closer. Every day brought new reports of their movements. More ships, more troops. They were relentless. The time to act was running out. One evening, as Max was in his quarters, preparing for the final battle, he was approached by a volunteer. It was one of his soldiers, a young man named Jonas. Jonas had been with Max since the beginning of the war. He had fought alongside him, bled with him, and had come to trust him like a brother. "I'll do it," Jonas said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "I'll connect to the device." Max's heart sank. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Jonas, no. I can't let you do this." But Jonas was already shaking his head. "I've made my peace. If this is the only way to stop the Verax, then I'm willing to sacrifice myself for it. We've come too far to give up now." Max's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. He knew the stakes. If they didn't use the device, the Verax would destroy everything. But could he live with the price they would have to pay? "I won't let you do this alone," Max said, his voice fierce with determination. "We'll do this together."